like you got to start with Giannis here, but let's get the camera on my friend Mike Greenberg here because he's very upset about everything that he saw.
I'm sorry. I was just having a flashback to 5 men looking completely panicked and discombobulated, throwing the ball frantically around the perimeter and then hoisting up a terrible 3 contested with 1 second left on a shot clock, which seems to be the offensive game plan of the Milwaukee Bucks. The last 16 minutes of that game, in which they got a 15-point lead with something like 4 minutes left in the third quarter. And from that moment forward, I don't know that I've ever seen a team look less able to close out a big win on the road than they did. They looked panicked and totally out of control to me. This is a team with a guy who some people say is the best player in the sport and a guy who some people say is going to be the coach of the year. Tibbs, what happened?
Well, I think the big thing is making shots. I thought you have to give Toronto a lot of credit for their defense. They loaded up on them, they double-teamed them, and I think Game 5 was the swing game. So they couldn't hit threes in that game. And I give Toronto a lot of credit for the way they helped and they recovered and challenged those shots at the three-point line. The pressure of that moment of going to the finals is probably different for Milwaukee than it was for Toronto. Toronto had Kawhi, they had Danny Green, they have Gasol, who's been in a lot of big games, they have Kyle, who's been in a lot of big games. Milwaukee hasn't been there yet. There's a lot of pressure in those moments. I think that will come. When you look at the progression of Giannis, for a 24-year-old to do the things that he's done and to watch his growth and to see who he is, I give Milwaukee a lot of credit. They didn't make shots. When you look at Game 5 was a very, very close game.
I'm not talking about Game 5, though. I'm talking about on the road, a 15-point lead in the third quarter of a game that you absolutely have in your control. And it wasn't they didn't make shots. They didn't get one good look at the basket. They didn't look like they had any idea how they wanted to try. Do they run a play? I understand that they just run pace and space, which is a new basketball phrase for we don't run an offense. But do they have a single play? Is there literally one play they can run that all 5 guys are going to go to a particular place on the floor, the ball is going to move, and the objective is to get a good shot at the basket?
Well, I think that's will be part of their growth to understand. Like, I think after a series, you go back through the playoffs, you look at the things you did well, the things you didn't do well, and then you'll add on to what you think you need to work on. So I think some of those questions will be answered. But to think about this team last year, they were a 7 seed. They lost in 7 games to Boston. Actually played very well in that series. They made a major step this year. And when your best player is 24 years old and Giannis's impact on winning has been huge. And again, you have to give Kawhi a lot of credit. When they moved Kawhi onto Giannis, that created problems. But then also building walls and double teaming him and getting the ball out of his hands, that made it difficult for them. So I think to answer your question, maybe they do have to add more offense to what they're doing. But also the thing that made them so successful all season long was the way they played. And so maybe they have to look at the playoffs and say, okay, if we add this to what we're doing, that'll make it better. But Giannis, his growth and his impact on winning is special.
So to your point that you made earlier about the Bucks not having that experience in the playoffs, late game management from the coaching standpoint, it felt like if maybe Budenholzer had just called a timeout to calm him down a little bit, some of those moments, it would have been better.
Well, you just heard from one of the best coaches in the profession, right? And he's not going to be critical of Mike Budenholzer. I'm just a young assistant coach. So I'm going to take what he should have said and really put it into perspective.
Please do.
In Game 5, he panicked. Okay, he changed his whole starting lineup. You bring in Brogdon, you take out Mirotic from the starting lineup, and then now Chris Middleton is in a difficult situation because now he only gets 9 shots. Why? Because Malcolm Brogdon is a guy who shoots the basketball. So I think he messed up in that perspective. But in Game 6, he was up 15 points 2 times in the second half, and he took Giannis out of the game. I'm not taking Giannis out of the game till I'm up 30, Coach. This is my Game 7. Okay, I have to get this game back to Milwaukee, and by any means necessary, if I have to play Giannis 48 minutes, I'm going to do it.
What do you think of that?
Well, a couple things. Brogdon started a good chunk of the season prior to getting hurt. So obviously he was going back to him because of the success that they had with him. So you have to factor that into it. The point about keeping Giannis on the floor, that's something that probably they have to look at. particularly when you're on the road, your margin of error is a lot smaller. When he was off the floor, it made a big difference. So, but those are, Mike Budenholzer is a great coach. And the season they had was terrific. I think sometimes we look at whoever loses a series and we say, oh, this guy was out-coached. No, it's a make or miss league. I mean, you take a look at, when we talk about how great things are for Toronto, well, Philadelphia easily could have been in the conference finals, and they could easily be in the finals.
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
so to your point, I'm just saying that it's a lot harder than it looks, and then you also have a limit as to how many timeouts you can call.
Oh, of course.
And you're saving your timeouts too.
Crucial
for
game
the end of the
8.
game.
Yeah. I mean, but I mean, the point, DJ and I are on the same side on this. Yeah. This is your whole season.
I see what you guys are doing.
But it's the whole.
No, we're not
point
ganging
is,
up on you.
what are you saving them for?
I'm with you, Tim.
Like, this is it. But I really did. I agree.
Yeah.
He coached that game as though losing didn't mean their season was over. I don't care how few timeouts you have. You can't save them for the end of the game. I understand that it wound up being a 3-point game, but that game got completely away from them. Yeah. They wound up playing the entire fourth quarter from behind when they had a 15-point lead.
And it's a fair point, but let me say this. So with Kawhi, big game experience.
Yeah.
And successful big game experience.
It means
championship.
a lot. It means a lot.
It means a lot.
It does.
And there's steps that you have to go through to understand that.